for the last financial year. On paper, somebody might say we have a lot more money and we are doing pretty well. Let me begin with Francis Muhire. What you make of what has been put together for the financial year that is upcoming and whether it actually addresses the concerns of the Ugandans right now?
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, dear viewers. Well, when you look at the National Budget Framework paper, you're going to see that it is actually the same script. It's been good from the same script. There is no much difference. Maybe the only difference is that now we are running a program-based, budget. That's why you no longer see, sectors. Instead, you see programs. But it is the same thing. I mean, when you look at the programs, for example, you're going to see human development or human capital development program is taking again around 18%, which is not different from actually what we've been getting. And when you talk of human development capital program, you're talking about a program that has health, it has education, you have PDM, then you also have gender and labor. So, but in general, when you look at the budget allocations, it is still the same. You're going to see that there are high levels of irrational allocation of budget resources in terms of allocating more resources to non-productive sectors at the expense of development or productive or critical sectors like health and education. In fact, this time even resources allocated to those three critical sectors have reduced. If you try to check what is in the budget framework and what actually was allocated this financial year, you're going to see that there has been a reduction. So there is no big difference. We still have irrational allocation of these budgetary resources. Okay. And I'm afraid that the common person out there may not feel any positive impact as being promised by the government.
From the angle of the private sector, there is a lot to look out for, and of course aspects including sustainability of businesses themselves. You, apart from being an economist, you are buried in some businesses, what you're pursuing. I want to first hear your take from a businessman's perspective. When you heard and saw the skeleton of this budget, were you optimistic? Did you look at the next financial year as one that you were finally going to say, well, we've overcome COVID?
I think what was very interesting about the budget, especially on TV, there was a very sensational component by Honorable Semuju about some allocations to some departments of government, which was more like giving a picture to the public of who is likely to benefit the most. It doesn't feel like the private sector is going to benefit more from this budget, because it feels more consumptive, more like they are consumption-based rather than investment-based. You don't also see where you're going to get that money from, ideally. After the pandemic, you'd expect that there is heavy investment in investment-minded kind of budgeting, so that the economy is priority, businesses are priority, trade is facilitated, and as well as production, manufacturing is also facilitated. Cost of money is reduced, but you don't get that feeling from the budget. And I think for the business sector, I think self-reliance is where you don't need to necessarily look up to government, but look up your groupings, your concerted efforts, because there's still a lot of opportunity that can be leveraged on, even without government intervention.
Okay. Francis, a spanner has been thrown into the works by the legislation that was assented to by the President, where we see consideration of foreign aid that comes into the country. And of course, having already passed the budget, considerations for external borrowing are on. What does this mean?
I think this is a worry to all Ugandans that actually following up all these developments. Uganda, we heavily rely on foreign aid, whether in terms of grants or loans or donations. And when you look at our budget, there's always that big part which is in form of budget support coming from external sources. So of course the president did what he thinks is right, and the majority, including myself, I think was right. But when we are aware that there is a cost, there is an implication. So because it is to do with the national cultural values and beliefs. So but the cost is going to be immense, and I hope key stakeholders, decision makers are aware of this. So probably they should be having plan B, because as we take such a decisions, given the cost at hand, we need to be cutting our appetite for these actually external funding or sources of funding. Yeah, so it's going to be really difficult, but we shall go through.
In other words, we should be ready for a real shock. Because right now, what I know is finance ministry technocrats should be back in the hot rooms trying to figure out exactly how it's going to happen in case Washington says, well, we are not giving you this amount of money, and then also the taps or the provisions for borrowing are also, squeezed. How exactly should or can a finance minister go through this right now?
Actually, it's beyond what Museveni did by signing that law. When you look at the global financial sector as we speak now, as I said the last time I was here, for example, IMF came out and gave a signal that is going to be hard. We are not going to be having actual resources to lend, especially these countries with high appetite for debt. So for me, I expected the government actually, because we expected all this to happen. So I expected the government to actually come up with a budget that would be close to our means in terms of tax revenue. Because when you look at that, the budget 52.7, we expect that ULA is going to collect over 29 trillion shillings. So where are you going to get the rest? So I expected the government to cut its budget, close to actually what we can be able to support, we as a country. But I want to tell Ugandans that however much we have these worries that we need funding from abroad or support from abroad, I can tell you that if, for example, we ensured the value of money through, of course, fighting corruption, I can tell you that the money or the revenue we are actually collect with ULA should be in position to do a great job. The only challenge is that corruption is still high, there is misuse, fiscal indiscipline at the maximum levels. So as long as we're in this position, even the amount of money we collect for, through Uganda Revenue Authority is not going to be enough, and we'll keep on, relying on external funding. So we have to know the situation we are in now, that the external funding is going to be difficult. First of all, it is expensive in terms of monetary terms, because we've seen the cost of borrowing is going to increase. It is already actually on a high rise. We also, of course, are seeing the external forces, threatening, given the fact that, the president passed through this law, that the funding is also going to be cut. So we expected all this, but unfortunately the government is continuing to behave as if we are living in the past.
Of course, revenue collection, there has been an increase in collections. What statistics I have here, 21 trillion in financial year 2021, 2022. Financial year, the previous had been 14, and this comes to 2022-2023, 11.67 trillion, against the projection of 11.74 trillion in the next financial year. This is pretty much very small amounts, especially when it comes to an increase. Collins, do you think Mr. Rujoki and the Uganda Revenue Authority have a new memo? Especially given the fact that they had already rolled out some taxes for us. Do you think another memo has come through?
I don't know if there's another memo, but what I think they need to become more innovative and not look at the normal way of raising taxes, collecting taxes. in the past, a collection of taxes has been perceived as punitive. You know, you go after businesses and you punish them for remitting, and yet you're ignoring the fact that for 2 years there was lockdown, and businesses, the whole supply chain was dismantled, and including globally. So it's necessary for these tax collectors to start looking at how do we become support entities, that if a business has failed, you don't ignore it, or if they are not able to pay billions, how do we now facilitate or enable them to thrive? So they end up becoming more like financial consultants or something like that for these businesses.
That's right.
But on the other hand, there are areas of competency. Like, can I say that Uganda is advantaged, like food and gold. Now these two can catapult our revenues significantly, and just a few bottlenecks underneath. If we're not careful on the food front, because there's general a global crisis, you even hear, I got a call from DRC that food shortage, Kenya, they are looking for food. Now that would make our food go up if we are not careful.
That's right.
But if we can have a mechanism, especially of warehousing, and also why it's a serious threat, food is also, again, like I told you before, the Prophet Mbonye warned that, in the year, be careful about food. Make sure you stock food. So we need to find a way we manage our food not to disappear. Sadly,
right. Interesting there.
For gold, gold has high value and brings in a lot of revenue in a very short
We're already
period.
one of the leading exporters of gold.
But sadly, what we are not seeing is that there are only few players in it. And when you see, for instance, there was a time when AGR, its directors were sanctioned by the US for Treasury, and we lost billions just by sanctioning one company. Now that's an exposure that we shouldn't allow. So what I believe Revenue Authority should be looking for is there should be an increasing licensing of SMEs in gold trade. So there should be like 2 million. Now, the US is not going to sanction 2 million people. But if there are just 4 or 5 big major players, it's easy to look for, if they want to respond to the anti-gay. And then they say, let's look for the family, the first family where their business, their bank accounts, let's sanction this, let's sanction this, let's sanction this. And then the economy is down.
Gold trade, despite the very glossy statistics that we are availed with, the fact that we are a leading exporter, the opportunities are immense. When you speak about the need to bring on more people, especially the SMEs, that's a tricky one, because the trade itself has been ring-fenced and looks to be more political than business-like. Now, those are considerations that make some of us, especially broadcasters on the morning show, tread a little bit carefully. You are one of the players, perhaps, in the gold trade, aren't you?
I am, and we have an association that I'm chairing of gold traders. But what we found in our engagements with government is there is a misperception of the commodity, and to fear, people fearing an asset that gives you a lot of revenue. So you kind of create a ring fencing because you don't want others to benefit. But it's really a mindset, because we've had several workshops and people have changed their mind that no, look at it like anyone else can handle it. And we do trainings and capacity building, and I also engage leaders to tell them that when you ring fence this thing, if the Western or foreign forces come after your bank accounts, you no longer have ways to continue the trade. But if you have several other players in the industry, it becomes like what you can call you are at the top, the big ones, but there are so many that cushion you. Now, if they try to sanction you, you have a voice by saying, I need to defend and protect my artisans, my SMEs. But if you're only 5 and they sanction you, those small people won't go on the street to shout and defend you. You see what I mean? Like when they sanctioned AGR, nobody goes on the street and complains that we are losing revenue, because there are no small players. And when you do small players, like Dubai did, to create an environment where there's so many small players, it is the best security for the big political players.
What's your take on that?
You know, it's a very interesting and yet sensitive topic, talking about gold. You know, when you talk of gold in Uganda and look back about 50 years ago, you're going to find that in the start, you just had about 3 families actually which are controlling over 90% of gold, you know, trade or transaction within the country. And these are Ugandans, but with Asian descent. I'm happy that we now have, you know, local people, natives who are into this business. But I want to tell my brother that there is a lot to be done in terms of sensitizing Ugandans, because we are coming from, you know, this past where people, when they hear gold, they know, for example, there's a bullet or there is a general. You get what I mean? Yes. And yet we have potential as a country. You know, to maximize or optimize, you know, returns from the gold. Of course, gold, as we speak, it is the Uganda's leading export good since 2018. For the first time, gold surpassed coffee. And all I can say, yes, of course, we're going to find that, yes, we're exporting a lot of gold, earning the 35th largest gold exporting country in the world, but also have a lot of gold actually coming in. Wherever it is coming from, I don't want to know, but we have enough gold that is going through Uganda. So
we seem to be a gold transit.
Yes, actually in the region, Kampala is now, for example, the gold hub in the region after taking over from Nairobi. But the question is, for example, how much are we taxing gold? You know, for the first time, gold was taxed, I think, two years ago. And I remember the initial tax that was imposed or proposed was 0.5% per kilogram. You're talking about a kilogram worth 55,000 US dollars. Well, those who made noise, we said this is under taxation. It was increased from 0.5 to 1%, but still that is under taxation. But looking at gold from the bigger picture, I want to tell the viewers out there, or even you know, decision makers in this country, that we have too much potential in gold than even oil. You know, it is very easy to get gold from the ground than oil itself. And oil, given the, you know, the risks and uncertainty around oil are massive compared to gold. So this country, this government should actually be concentrating on gold than even oil. But you see, oil has been given too much attention, and I can tell you gold is more optimal than oil itself.
Okay, interesting perspective there. I hope the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Ramadan Govi, is watching. I know he knows much of the things, and perhaps there is a blueprint that he is rolling out, especially with regard to significant taxation in that industry to be able to recoup some of the revenues that we need. Some key allocations in the budget. I just want to go through wealth creation funds. You spoke about the fact that the budget is program-centered, you know, and of course, given the problems that come with programs and everything, wealth creation funds account to a combined total of 1.146 trillion Uganda shillings under the parish development model, 100 billion for a Myoga program, 46 billion for other circles under the microfinance support center. The education sector has 1 trillion Uganda shillings allocated to 12 universities. The health sector has 1.225 trillion Uganda shillings allocated to it. Agriculture research funding will be taking 155.6 billion. Works and transport has 2.475 trillion. Water and environment, as part of improving management of the environment and natural resources, has 37.56 trillion. Local government financing. The budget for local governments, including districts, cities and municipal councils for the next financial year is 5 billion, representing 10% of the national budget. We already have concerns with regard to the bloated nature of the local government, which speaks much to the size of the public sector or public service. When it comes to local government financing, which gaps must be closed as soon as possible to ensure that perhaps there's a lot more money that the local governments have in order to be able to roll out basic services, including healthcare, that seems to be decisions being taken at the top, and then by the time the local centers in our villages receive the medicines, somebody has decided that no, this local center 3 doesn't need this cash of Panadol, another one requires it. How best can the various allocations be streamlined? Can we pull from programs? But again, programs are political.
Yeah,
if you don't mind.
Programs are very political. I think local government is also an asset that is not well developed, if I may say. There is need for capacity building at the local government level on managing finance, especially investment finance, because you see when the PDM program, which should strengthen local government's capacity to run their affairs more sustainably, you find it is either underutilized, a lot of money is sent back, or it is abused. So I think there is need for capacity building, and especially public-private partnerships at local government level that can help turn these investments into long-term revenue earning mechanisms. I may also need to say that, for instance, what the president has done with the homosexuality bill, because you see, I noticed that in many local government places they rely on donor money. There is a way in which if money is for health, if money is for that social based money, so you find they kind of gear their activities around it. So what he has done, he has sent a message which is patriotic, if I may say. And when I say it's patriotic, it should help locals to start looking internally about because different areas have competitive advantages. The culture of saying that I have heard that in Kampala people make money from this, let us all do it. Or I've heard from Arua people make money, let us all do it, is not sustainable. It's better to say, what do we have that others don't have in our local setting or so, that is gives us a leverage or advantage over the others. And you know, there are other threats that are from the globalists. This anti-homosexuality is just one, but there are other threats. For instance, there is what was in the Davos meeting around climate change, lockdowns and things of the sort, which may impact various countries. There's ESG's standards that they want to impose on local government in every country. So, and yet people don't know these things. But what the president has done should help defend our patriotic approach. If the budget can be tested on its patriotic resilience, is it patriotic or is it foreign interest based? Could also be an indicator, because it's when you hear these figures, it's difficult to understand what is the intention, what's the spirit behind this, and the like. So, kind of trying to show how different is it from before or from previous regimes, previous periods, say before the pandemic.
Being seen to be patriotic could be subject to how each individual sees it from their point of view. Some would be wondering that if you are as patriotic as you project to be, then perhaps you should be reducing your own expenditure as State House so that other people can be able to receive a bit of this. But that is a question that might again you take us, or rather prolong the debate beyond the scope of this morning's abilities. Let me just come to Francis Muhire. Local government financing models that we can adopt to help us get to where we want to be, especially when it comes to economic transformation. Many people have said, for example, Wakiso and Kampala are too concentrated. Everyone is rushing into Wakiso. Everyone wants to come to Kampala to do business. And there is need to diversify, you know, economic attractions into places so that I can comfortably say I'm going to establish a shop in Butaleja, far-flung areas, where the local government has a certain threshold of money that it collects that does not come to the central government but stays within there to cater for issues in that particular region. Is it something that is sustainable round about now? Does it stand a chance against the politics of the day?
Good enough you've brought in the aspect of the politics of the day. I want to, to tell you that, I mean, we've been here, you've seen all these, financing models through government programs, and at the end of the day, you don't see the value for this money. And but the question is, is to do with the kind of structures we have, the implementers, and the facilitators of all these programs. For us who come from up country, I remember personally one time I decided to follow up.
Country people look good.
Yeah, so I remember I come from Kabale, so
okay.
I happened to do my internship actually at Kabale district local government.
Okay.
So I was like, let me take a step to find out. For example, I know money come through to the local government, let's say for youth development. So what really happens? And just to make a simple survey, I realized that most of the people within the districts, especially, for example, let's say the youth or the target beneficiaries, are not even aware of this. So you go to ask, for example, the information, officer, how come that you don't actually, make awareness, sensitize or tell the masses that actually these resources are here? Where does this money go? And that is just an example. So the challenge is that no matter how much money you allocate, whether through programs or sectors or whatever areas we may want to call them, at the end of the day, the money is not going to reach the targeted beneficiaries. Just as you talked of, private sector development, you're talking about over 1.7 trillion shillings being allocated to that sector. I want to tell whoever is out there excited, I would like to remind them that what happened during the lockdown, for example, the 600 billion shilling that was put in Uganda Development Bank for, let's say, SMEs, what happened? So it is all about the question of, do these resources actually reach the intended or target beneficiaries? Now, for me, this is what I think. Given the political environment of this country, and I'm talking about the system, no matter how much money you send through these programs, it is not going to work. And that's why we've had so many programs, singing about poverty eradication, and we still have poverty to the levels, you wouldn't want to see. Now, you see, before you make a policy, you need to know the kind of environment you're going actually to implement this policy. We have seen that it is not working this way because you have issues with stakeholders, whether the implementers or the beneficiaries are not prepared themselves. The implementers don't know what they're supposed to do, and of course corruption is part of the equation. This is what the government should know. That, for example, this government has been in power over, it's now coming 40 years. It has created a system that is inefficient, that cannot allow right things to be done. The best way the government can do, for example, the government should stop from borrowing. For example, let's say commercial banks. Soon it is even going to go to street money lenders. That's actually where we're heading. The government, I'm coming, first wait. The government should stop from actually borrowing whoever it is, any creditor, for example, within the domestic market. Because what the government is doing is to borrow from the domestic market and then use the money through the other inefficient system. Let the government stop from borrowing from the public, and then you're going to see, for example, the cost of borrowing in terms of interest rate going down, because all creditors, even investors, prefer to lend the government. But you see, you're lending the government at the expense of the private sector itself. Use these resources through inefficient system, and you're not going to see the results. So the government should stop borrowing to use its inefficient system, because it's not going to provide, results. The other way the government can do is to, the resources we have, for example, from URA, invest in critical productive sectors. And here I'm talking about health and education. I want to assure you that, for example, we are talking about rising cost of living. Yes, rising cost of living is a global phenomenon as we talk right now. But when you come back to Uganda, what should the government do? Spend money in those critical sectors, health and education. I want to tell you that Uganda, we have the highest out-of-pocket expenditure on health. You're talking about 37% in the region. Rwanda is at 10%. Kenya and South Sudan is at 23%, Tanzania is 24%. You can compare with Uganda's 37%, meaning that majority of Ugandans are spending much on health because they cannot get medication from public health care system. Ugandans in urban centers are spending much of their money or their monthly incomes on housing. I'm going to set a question out there. You don't have to give me the answer. Just take an average Ugandan working, let's say living in Kampala. You're going to find that majority pay more than 50% of their monthly incomes on housing. We are talking about the basics. Education. Parents are now taking their children to school. You know what is really going on. So, if the government does not really give priority to these critical sectors, health, education, for example, per capita expenditure on education in Uganda has been decreasing, for the past how many years. So as long as the government is putting much of the resources to non-productive sectors at the expense of productive or critical sectors, the cost of living is going to continue increasing. My brother here talked of a prophet that, I don't know prophets in Uganda, but he said that he once said that maybe food is going to be a problem. I want to tell you that during the first phase of lockdown, I saw that we are going to have a problem to do with, a food inflation in this country.
You prophesied.
No, I didn't prophesy, but as an economist, I predicted,
you predicted
based on how things were being handled.
Great.
That's good.
You see, Uganda, we all say, is a basket, it has potential to produce for the whole region. Yes, it is true. But I want to tell you that it is Uganda in the whole region that is recording death in big numbers due to hunger.
Wow.
I mean, we've just forgotten what has been happening in Kalamoja.
Yeah, it's a contradiction.
Let me just finish the point.
Yeah.
Uganda, we tend to move and forget very fast. A few months ago, you used to see statistics coming from Karamoja. People were dying of hunger. Now, that is to say that Uganda were not producing enough food. I mean, look at Karamoja and just look at the neighboring region like Sebe, region like Buko. They have a lot of food, but the food cannot reach Karamoja. You have food in the central, in west, but cannot reach eastern Uganda, where people really need this food. So what is the problem? The problem is about policy implementation in this country.
Wow.
Thank you.
React to that, Collins, but also importantly, take us through what the average Ugandan ought to do to improve their own condition. Many times the tone of language from government is pretty much you are on your own. Digital transformation has some opportunities for the youth, but many times I think there is a lot of gloss on it. People misunderstand it to think merely being online is to make money. Absolutely not. It is targeted. It should be something that is strategic. Respond to his submission, but also tell us how I can improve, because I need money in my wallet to be able to take care of my health, food on the table.
One advantage Uganda has compared to other countries, we have an entrepreneurial culture, if I may use that, or spirit. There is already a momentum to initiate, start new things.
That's right.
So that can be leveraged in food, creating food security communities where, because for food security, the most important thing is how you store it, how you manage it, and how you disseminate it. Of course, Tanzania Safe is producing more food. We can have if we have a good management food management system, it can actually come through here. Because, as I mentioned some time ago, nations like Switzerland, Germany also are leading exporters of foods they don't grow. So we can also position ourselves as leading exporters or managers of food. And the communities, associations of youth can help a great deal in grain processing and storage. The other thing that young people can also do, of course, is because indeed we are on our own, more or less, is to create housing, like moving away from the city or to create communities out of town, because the congestion of getting into the city, everybody buying a border, that needs to shift to look into other viable means, as of course we mentioned gold and other assets that we have.
All right, thank you very much. I'm afraid this discussion is going to have to be wound up, but it's one that will continue in light of developments, including the latest legislation hiccup that has the globe on tenterhooks, and we shall be following this particular developing story to see how it impacts on the economy ahead of budget reading. Collins Tugumisiriza, many thanks for the perspective. Many thanks to you too, Francis Muhire, for the perspective. It's always a pleasure to have your company. Kickstarter discussion will be that, but do stay with us. Replenish your